My name is Frank Aswani. I'm the CEO of AVPA, and welcome to the launch of the Southern African report of the study, Social Investment Landscape Mapping Study that we've been running since November 2019. For those of you who missed it, we did the Pan-African comparative launch on Tuesday, it was. And this is the second of the regional report, the first of the regional reports that we shall be launching. We're doing the East Africa launch on the 17th and the West Africa launch on the 19th. The details of how to join those sessions can be found on our website under the events page. So today we are going to follow this agenda. So I'll do a bit of an introduction on AVPA. My colleague Rachel, who's the Value Hub Director, will lead us through the background of the research and the key highlights. Rachel's been very instrumental in making this study come alive. She spent hours on terrible time zone differences, being that she's currently in California, but really grateful for the work that Rachel's put into this. And then we are going to have the research findings from our partners, Kanika and Rachel Wangari from Intellecap, who were partners in running this study. And we're very, very grateful for the great work that they've done in pulling together the data that you'll be seeing this afternoon. So from an introduction perspective, just for those of you who don't know AVPA, from a problem perspective, first of all, Africa needs $500 billion to $1.2 trillion annually between now and 2030 to meet our SDG financing gap. That's a huge amount of money. And the reality is that we don't have that kind of money in our social sector space. So we've got to be thinking of how we'll look into the private sector to get that money, where if you look just at the capital markets globally, they're sitting on about $250 trillion, and the financial markets have something in the range of $320 trillion. We just need $1.2 trillion of that a year to meet our SDG financing gap. So for that to happen, we need to create improved collaboration between providers of debt, equity, or grant, what we call the continuum of capital. So AVPA is a platform that offers the opportunity to bring together these different types of investors, from foundations, corporate family offices, international NGOs, DFIs to donors. And as they work across the continuum of capital, we integrate them not just as a financial capital provider group, but also bring together those providing human intellectual capital as well. And the whole purpose is for us to see how we can increase the flow of capital into social investments in Africa and address the SDG gaps. We're also part of an international network of sister organizations that includes...
sorry, just a moment, Frank. Do you want to put the slides? The slides are still not on.
Oh, still not showing?
No.
Okay, weird. I assume there was. Thank you for pointing that out, Kanika. Just hold on a second. Hold on. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought I was sharing my screen, so apologies about that. Nonetheless, so we are part of an international network of sister organizations, as I mentioned, that includes the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network. That's the biggest social investment movement or network in Asia. We also have EVPA in Europe and Latin Pact in Latin America. For that purpose, we're able to connect African social investors to their peers globally and move best practices in and out of the continent to accelerate our progress towards our SDG targets. When you look at social investors, the right side box will give you a sense of how we define social investors. We define them as people or organizations deploying capital, seeking social returns with varying expectations of financial returns. So from a supply side, we embrace philanthropy, impact investment, and social responsible investment. And these are people who are either impact first or finance first in the deployment strategies. And they use different types of tools to be able to meet their goals. So grants, debt, equity. And we're big proponents of also seeing how we can apply blended finance to drive increased flow of capital in social investments. But as I mentioned earlier, we recognize the significance of non-financial capital as well. On the demand side, the ultimate target is to see how we can drive capital towards non-profit, social enterprise, and sustainable businesses. Our strategic goals are as follows. we believe the first thing we've got to do is to really create a burning platform around the issue of Africans understanding the problem we're facing, that we don't have enough capital from traditional sources of capital that we're used to. We don't have enough aid coming to Africa. We don't have enough government revenue. If you think about the aid, for example, Africa gets about $50 billion of aid a year, and our government revenues across the continent stand at about $500 billion. When you think about all of that against the $1.2 trillion we require, we are at about just under 50%. So that requires the innovation that we need to attract private sector capital into social investments. For that to happen, once people have understood the problem, and Einstein always said, if you've got an hour to solve a problem, spend 55 minutes understanding it and 5 minutes solving it. The next phase is for us to really enhance investor education, because this whole innovative financing space is fairly new. And we as AVPA are looking to make sure that we can have a lot more African social investors plugged into and actively playing in the innovative financing space. So when we set out to do this, to our shock, we were looking to do this with African knowledge partners, and to our shock, we found out that there was only one institution in Africa that has an innovative financing program, and it happens to be in South Africa, the University of Cape Town, the Barter Center. Otherwise, if you have to look across the continent, there's no other place or institution that you can find that has an innovative financing program. So your options then remain that you have to go to Oxford, Cambridge, Duke, Stanford, and a couple of other universities globally to get an innovative financing program. And if Africa is to do that, we'll still be talking about innovative financing program and SDG financing 50 years from now. So we're trying to change that. And what we want to do as AVP, we want to pull together 30 or 40 Pan-African universities and business schools and create an association of innovative financing institutions on the continent. And then we can bring your Oxfords and Cambridge and Dukes to train our people. And in so doing, we can create 30 or 40 centers of excellence in innovative financing across 30 or 40 different countries. And that way we can start training people and running programs on innovative financing at scale, to the point where we can be training 1,000, 2,000 people a month across the continent and bring more people to play in this space, so we can crowd in more capital into social investments. For that to happen, it takes us to a third strategic goal, which is really around championing grant making, because if we're going to crowd in private sector capital, we need to have enough catalytic capital to de-risk social investments. And that program particularly objective targets our grant makers to help them diversify from being traditional grant makers to also being catalytic investors. So those points 2 and 3 objectives, we would be happy to partner with donors who can help us fund those programs, because they'll have huge catalytic impact on the continent. And we believe by implementing those 2 in 6 months, we can make Africa have the highest concentration of innovative financing institutions in the world. And then the third objective there is really about what we're doing today, is connecting social actors across borders, so we can not only learn from each other, but increase collaboration between Africans and also between Africa and the rest of the world. I'd like to, at this point in time, to thank our donors who funded this study, the Rockefeller Foundation, USADF, Social Capital Foundation, and an anonymous donor, without whom we would not have had the opportunity to produce this data that hopefully will be informative to the broader African landscape. I'll now hand over to my colleague Rachel to take over from here.
Hi everyone, I hope you can all see my screen. Great. So as Frank mentioned, as AVPA, when we started this journey to produce the landscape studies, we were really thinking about sort of how we could help facilitate more capital into achieving the SDGs across Africa. And when we started to look at the landscape for, what social investors are doing across the continent, it becomes clear very quickly that most countries are stagnating on progress toward the SDGs. We've seen a lot of progress in areas like climate action, but in Southern Africa, as you can see here, absolutely, stagnating or not making any progress or very small progress on things like poverty, inequality, health and well-being, hunger, peace and justice. And so the landscape study was really about looking at, what are the pools of capital that are available across the continent that can help us address these issues and start, moving more quickly toward achieving the SDGs in this last decade that we have before getting to 2030. So what we found when we started looking at this is, what Frank was mentioning, that the traditional sources of capital for social and environmental finance and development across the continent are declining and not anywhere near the size of the SDG financing gap. And in Southern Africa specifically, we've seen official development assistance declining and also a decline in foreign direct investment. And tax revenue, while higher in Southern Africa than many other parts of the continent, is still relatively low, and that really restricts public spending ability on development challenges. So within this context, we are looking at the landscape study to really provide a baseline of understanding for where we are in terms of social finance to achieve the SDGs and where we could go. So we asked the following research questions. We said, who are the active social investors? We looked at the continent, but for the purposes of our discussion today, the Southern Africa report, we looked at 6 countries across Southern Africa. Who are the social investors there? What kind of capital are they deploying? How are they deploying it, and with whom? So, what are the size of these different capital pools? What are the investment strategies that are being used by different types of social investors? Looking at differences between foundations and family offices and corporate social investors. What kind of partnerships do we see amongst these different actors? And really starting to map as well the concentration across sectors, geographies, and investment stages to see where the gaps are. And also looking at that supply of capital, how does it match up against demand from social enterprises, from high impact businesses, from nonprofits who are all working to contribute to many different development challenges and to the SDGs. We also took a look at the enabling environment for social investment across the countries. And the studies conclude with recommendations for how we can foster more social investment growth to achieve the SDGs and how do we promote more collaboration, as Frank was talking about earlier. So this is what we found. For Southern Africa, we've found a diverse group of social investors, nearly 250 of them active across these countries. The study looked at in depth at South Africa, Zambia, and Mozambique, and then did a high-level assessment as well in Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Angola. And we found that while there is a real diversity and large number of social investors across the region, a huge majority of them are based in South Africa. We also saw that there's quite a number of regionally based family foundations and corporate social investors, including corporate foundations, active across the region. And so we're excited to find that diversity and are also keen to see how we can promote more activity outside of South Africa and in other countries as well. So overall, if you look at the different types of social investors, we find that development finance institutions are very active in Southern Africa. They deploy more capital there than in other African regions. Donors also still continue to deploy a large amount of social investment capital. But we see, especially in South Africa, a lot of activity by corporates and corporate foundations. And that's driven by a strong ecosystem, but also by CSR policy that's been established in South Africa. We see also activity amongst family foundations, although the volume of that capital is much less than what we see in the corporate sector. So when you look at the maturity of the social investment ecosystem, it really varies strongly across countries. So when we look at our 3 deep dive countries here, we see quite an advanced, well-developed ecosystem in South Africa, for individual.
Rachel, just a second. Guys, can you all see Rachel's slides?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we can, Frank.
All right. Okay. No, someone made a comment to me that they were not seeing. Okay, that's fine. Rachel, continue.
Okay. Yep. Just let me know. Just jump in if I'm going too quickly or if we can't see the slides. And as I think someone mentioned in the chat box earlier, we also have all of this information on our website. So, you know, all of this tiny text here that you can't read, you can look through it in more depth through the reports on our website. So, in South Africa, as I was saying, we really see an advanced individual philanthropy and corporate giving ecosystem. And so lots of activity there, as I said, driven by policy, but also just, you know, strong enabling environment institutions that have been developed over some time. In Zambia, we're really starting to see growth in the social investment system as well. Strong growth in crowdfunding, engagement with innovative finance, the emergence of angel investing. So it's exciting to see those developments happening in Zambia as well. In Mozambique, a different picture, a much less developed ecosystem. Strong activity still mostly amongst donors and DFIs, and seeing some corporate social investment from extractive industry corporates, but not as much activity as we see in the other countries. So I will hand it over now to the IntelliCap research team to take us through the key findings in some more depth. Let me stop sharing my screen. Rachel Wangari, over to you.
And as this is happening, guys, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat group. We'll try and get to as many of them as possible.
Okay, Rachel, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as Rachel mentioned, we looked at various categories of social investors during our research, and interesting to see the different trends in terms of sector preference, in terms of the geographical concentration across all these social investors that we looked at. So just to start off, looking at donors, yes, donors have deployed less capital in Southern Africa when you compare to East and West Africa, partly because of the middle income status of some of the countries like South Africa in the region that are the biggest economy. And as Rachel mentioned, ODA has been declining to the region significantly by 20% in the last 5 years. In terms of country concentration, we've seen a lot of donor deployment into Mozambique, and I think this could be attributed to the natural disasters that have been there in the country, really requiring a lot of aid and humanitarian support. And also, we've seen donors are also shifting strategies from just deploying aid to moving to more impact investing. So this is also linked to the decline that we are seeing. Again, just looking at net ODA percentage of government expense, this is highest in Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe that are really leveraging this capital to solve their development challenges. Very little proportions in Botswana, Angola, and South Africa. Just to emphasize that with this, we see a need for governments, especially in South Africa, where there is high tax revenue, to really use the capital efficiently, given the low level of external financing from donors. In terms of sectors, we saw a high focus of donors on health and education, health accounting for about 43%, and education for about 24% of the total donor funding that was deployed in these 6 countries. Donors are also a big proponent of skill development and entrepreneurship among the youth. And when you go through the reports, you'll see we have a whole section on youth employment, and we did try to map who are the funders that are focused on youth employment. And donors emerged as the top funders of youth employment in the region. Just looking at DFI investments, we saw a high concentration in terms of sectors and geographies. with about 84% of the total capital deployment going to three key sectors. That's financial services, energy, and agriculture. But even then, a higher skew towards financial services, which accounted for 48% of the total portfolio. In terms of geography, South Africa accounting for 52% of the portfolio, a relatively higher number going to Zambia at 21% and Mozambique at 13%. Very low capital going to the other focus countries, Angola and Angola. We identified that debt was the commonly used instrument by DFIs in the region, with accounting for about 78% of the portfolio. And interestingly, a divergence from DFIs operating in the region to those operating in the other focus regions, the East and West Africa, was that there's a high deployment of capital in form of indirect investment through funds, while the other regions have focused on direct investments into businesses. TA was identified as an integral part of all DFI deals, with DFIs working with external consultants to really do capacity building of the enterprises or the businesses that they are looking to invest in. With, again, DFIs have a large focus on impact measurements, leveraging global frameworks and tools, which they customize based on the, they customize based on the businesses they're investing in. So just looking at SFMs and sustainability aligned fund managers, as we've described in the report, are PE, VCs, debt funds, incubators, and accelerators. And we saw an accumulated deployment of 1.17 billion in Southern Africa between 2015 and 2019, again with a high focus on energy, financial services, and agriculture emerging as the top sectors. Again, largely skewed towards financial services, particularly with tech-based financial service providers, the fintechs, which the sector accounted for about 58% of the portfolio. In terms of geographical concentration, so South Africa accounts for almost all the portfolio, so about 86% of this. But interestingly, we saw a lot, a significant proportion of the SFM funding also going to Zimbabwe, and just about 3% to Zambia. Very little in Mozambique and Angola. So in terms of deal size, we saw an average deal size of 6.4 million, with 52% of the capital deployed to deals of less than 1 million. And as is commonly known, the missing middle. So we saw a very large decline in the deals that were between 1 million to 5 million, really showcasing that missing middle gap and a high need to see how to promote growth of maturing growth stage and maturing businesses. In terms of TA, again, the SFMs that we engaged really did emphasize that they are working on providing TA as part of their investment, but the TA that is provided is mainly post-investment TA with a large gap when it comes to pre-investment TA. Also, impact measurement emerged as an important aspect of all SFM investments, with SFMs mentioning again that they leverage global frameworks. Looking at corporate social investors, so it was interestingly, as Rachel mentioned earlier, that to note that CSIs are really active in South Africa, of course, driven by a strong ecosystem as well as the legal requirements. We saw about 2.7 billion deployed by CSIs between 2015 and 2019. And this, again, is largely driven by the main sectors of the economy, that's retail and wholesale, mining, as well as financial services sector. We saw a lot of these going to education, which accounted for about 50%, and social and community development, which accounted for 15%, and agriculture for 9%. And in terms of how the CSIs prefer to deploy, so most of them are working directly with non-profit organizations, while we did see also collaboration with government and CSIs deploying through government institutions and also for-profit businesses. So these are social enterprises that are operating for profit purposes. In terms of formalization of this, we saw the largest proportion of CSI funds deployed through the registered foundation or trust linked to the corporate, but also a significant proportion of it is still being deployed through the CSI department in certain corporates. So interestingly, we also saw some of the CSIs moving from giving donations and grants to more innovative financing mechanisms, with CSIs participating as outcome funders, for example, in impact bonds that are already there, and also some moving to impact investing and ecosystem building through running acceleration and incubation programs. So while we saw a very well developed and growing ecosystem for CSI in South Africa, in Zambia and Mozambique, it's a different case where we didn't really do the quantitative assessment of how large the giving is, and because of a lack of availability of data. But what we saw and what we were hearing from the interviews was there's a large focus on education and health and community empowerment initiatives, and these are largely driven by the mining and extractive corporates. So we also looked at family foundation, and it was interesting to see how large or how many family foundations are there in South Africa. So compared to the other regions, again, this is a very active capital provider group, and interesting to see that there is availability of local capital in this region compared to the other two that we looked at. In terms of the sectors that the family and regional family foundation are focused on, so health was really the largest sector of focus, accounting for about 61%. But also we saw family foundation focused on building entrepreneurship and economic empowerment, particularly for the youth, and this accounted for 33% of the capital. We saw a very close working relationship with the government, with 63% of capital deployed by regional family foundation going deployed through government to support government initiatives. An average transaction size of 10 or 11 million was observed between family foundation, which is interesting to note when you compare with the average transaction size by the North American Foundation, which is about $900,000. Just again to see the similarities and the differences between North American Foundation. So North American Foundation also focused highly on health, which accounted for 51% of the total capital, and education accounting for 23%. And this again could be linked to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is the largest North American family foundation. And given that their highest focus is on health, could also see why the portfolio was highly skewed towards health. Angel investing is also gaining momentum, again, just to see how it is largely growing in Southern Africa when you compare to the other regions that we looked at. We saw an increase in total angel investments from about $2.6 million in 2015 to 12.9 million. This was about 400% increase, really seeing that angel investors are really coming in to deploy funds and especially to support early stage enterprises. And just looking at the assets under management, venture capital assets under management. So angel investors account for about 4.2%, but a significant number of deals at 24.7% of the total VC deals that were reported in the region in 2018. And of the growth, this growth can be largely attributed to investor networks that are promoting the concept and also working with angel investors to facilitate the deployment of capital. Looking at the focus sectors, there's a huge focus in technology businesses, with fintech emerging as the main preferred sector with about 17% of all angel deals in 2017, and also products and services, softwares and consumer products emerging as other sectors that angel investment is largely focused on. So other than the financial services and health, most of the other deals have been to non-SDG aligned sectors. Average deal size for the angels we observed was about 110,000 USD. Faith-based giving plays a crucial role in development, but not a lot of research and a lot of innovative financing is happening in this sector, where most of the capital is deployed for healthcare and for education, but not in strategic manner that can sort of help scale up. So this is an area that we really identify that needs a lot of further research and a lot of innovative instruments that can be introduced to see how faith-based giving can be leveraged to collaborate with other social investors. And one of the areas that we really identify that this can play a huge role is on solving the unemployment challenge, particularly among the youth. But we did identify how local foundations are partnering with faith-based organizations to try and solve some of those challenges, particularly the Job Creation Fund created by Motsepe Foundation and the 33 religious FUs. Diaspora remittances, so we saw very lower remittance inflows when you compared to the other regions, but still the remittances that are there, and particularly in Zimbabwe, which recorded very high, these are not leveraged innovatively, and this really presents an area for further analysis and an area which can be tapped into building and bringing more catalytic capital. So I'll just go to the demand side to just highlight some of the findings on the demand side. So what we saw is that the social investment capital remains inadequate and still not well aligned to the demand. One of the key things we found out is in South Africa, particularly, the entrepreneurship levels are very low compared to other countries. And there's a high failure rate of businesses, with 85 to 90% of businesses failing in the first 5 years of operation. So this shows an ecosystem challenge and a financing challenge that really needs to be addressed. As financing came out as one of the biggest challenges facing particularly youth entrepreneurs who then opt to get employed in the formal sector. Interestingly, we saw that in South Africa, 70% of the jobs are in the formal sector. This is compared to, when you compare this to Kenya, which has about 80% of the businesses in the informal sector, you can see a lot of gaps, because the informal sector has a high opportunity to really employ most of these youths. And that presents a really a big area for any capital providers that really want to come in and make a difference in youth employment. And again, youth unemployment is very high in South Africa, about 56%. So really, this shows the gaps that are really there and that needs to be addressed by financing to that sector. So in Zambia and Mozambique, most of the businesses are in the early stages with very few venture stage or mature business. And this could explain why we saw relatively lower deals in that front. But to build the businesses into the next stage, there's that need of very tailored financing that goes into building and scaling the businesses to the next stage. So just looking at the demand side in terms of the non-profits, we've seen that non-profits, NGOs largely depend on international sources of financing. And given the declining financing and the changing of strategies from just deploying grants to NGOs, there is that need to also rethink how NGOs are financed. One of the challenges that we had from interviewers and we also saw was that the largest proportion of the funding that goes to nonprofits is restricted to programmatic interventions. So very minimal of it is directed to capacity development, and that's a huge area for innovative ways to deploy capital linked to both the program as well as the capacity development of the nonprofits. But more importantly, also for nonprofits to rethink their revenue models and their fundraising strategies to more innovative revenue models. So we've seen nonprofits or NGOs that are crowdfunding to attract more financing for the operations. So this slide talks about the enabling environment, the ecosystem and the policy, the ecosystem support as well as the policy and regulatory environment. So other than South Africa, where we saw some policies that are working to boost the social investment capital flow, there was a limited policies and regulation in the other countries. But across the entire region, there's the lack of overarching frameworks and regulation, and this really presents an area for intervention. In terms of ecosystem support, so we did see a number of incubators and early stage support organizations that are operating in the region, but close to 75% of these are in South Africa, and further, most of these are concentrated in Cape Town and Joburg. So for the businesses and enterprises that are in peri-urban or rural locations, they face challenges in accessing the support that is provided by incubators and early stage support organizations. Accelerators and TA providers. So this was one of the challenges that we identified that is there in building the businesses to the next stage, from early stage to mature and growth stage businesses. And again, these are also in South Africa and in the large cities. Networks and platforms, we did identify some that are trying to build the various forms of social investment. So that we saw organizations that are supporting the networking for impact investors and for philanthropy associations as philanthropic actors. But we do acknowledge and identify the need for really close collaboration across the entire continuum of capital and the different providers of capital. That's one of the things that is missing across most of the countries. Knowledge and research, we saw a lot of organizations that are working to build the knowledge database in South Africa, and it explains why we didn't struggle much as well, even as we were trying to build the various data sets. In South Africa, data we could easily find, but this is a major challenge in the other focus countries. So South Africa, we also saw a very unique ecosystem support for philanthropy with strategic advisors that are mobilizing and deploying philanthropic capital from individuals as well as corporates. And these have also played a key role in boosting the corporate social investments, as we saw in earlier slides. For strategic advisors for nonprofits, this was also one of the challenges that we identified with the push for nonprofits to sort of venture into more sustainable, innovative revenue models. There's a need for strategic advisors that will be able to help them transition into that state. Yes. I think that's the end of our presentation. Okay.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I think we're handing over to Frank now to talk about future research and next steps. And then please do, everyone, add questions. We've seen a couple of questions come through the chat box, but if you have other questions, post them there, and then we'll do a Q&A session. So Frank, over to you.
Yeah, let me just share my screen and make sure that I actually do share my screen this time. Give me a second. Okay, so can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome, awesome. So when it comes to the recommendations that the study brought out, especially with regards to Southern Africa, there's some similarities to the rest of the continent and some differences. But let me highlight some of the specifics that are very unique to South Africa and some that are common across. So the need to mobilize concessional catalytic capital is significant, especially if we're going to address the barriers for funding SMEs and social enterprises. This is important if we're going to crowd in private sector capital, because we've got to find capital to de-risk social investments for private sector capital to find these investments attractive. And this is a common problem across the continent and a common need across the continent. However, I think Southern Africa, and specifically South Africa, is in a very unique position to do this better than the rest of the continent because of the amount of grant capital available in this part of the world. You know, if you look at how much grant capital we have in Southern Africa, and more so South Africa, it's a lot more than we find in any other part of Sub-Saharan Africa. The second point there about promoting education and awareness, this is really about investor education, and we recognize to have more people playing in this new innovative financing paradigm, we need to have a lot more informed players who understand the options available to them, understand how to collaborate and play with other types of investors who they normally wouldn't have. And in so doing, we can create ecosystems and collaboration that that offer the right type of tailored financing for these organizations as they go through their life cycle of growth. The third point there is about increasing awareness, and especially around gender-lens investing. COVID has specifically made the whole gender gap and inequity a lot worse. But even pre-COVID, we had major challenges on the gender side, and we believe that we have such a great opportunity right now to drive gender-lens investing through the continent. And one of the things as AVPA we're doing now is we've just created and built a gender platform on our website. So please, if you go on our website and check under platforms, you'll find our gender platform that went up maybe about 2 weeks ago. And under our gender platform, we have created 3 communities of practice. Health and safety is one, economic empowerment and livelihood is another, and then there's a gender-lens investing specifically that looks at supporting women-led businesses, entrepreneurs, and female fund managers. Point 4 there talks about the need to establish toolkits and training programs, because some of this stuff is important if we're going to help nonprofits grow and transition into more and greater sustainability. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on restricted programmatic funding, and we forget that these organizations need to be trained in capacity building to help them transition to this new paradigm. So I think that kind of stuff is important to do. Point 5 there about offer tailored TA to support post-investment monitoring and value creation. I think M&E is non-negotiable if we're going to be able to track whether what we're doing is giving us a desired outcome and impact. Point 6 is about the legal and regulatory framework. We are starting to see quite a bit of change in this space. We've seen, for example, Tunisia, Senegal, and Rwanda come up with startup acts to promote the creation and building of more startups within their economies. And these startup acts are being replicated across multiple countries on the continent. We've also seen Kenya come up with a social enterprise policy that's now being forwarded to Parliament, and South Africa has also followed suit. So we're seeing a lot of transfer of information across different countries. And these have further been enabled and facilitated by the emergence of the NABs. I'm not sure how many of you know about NABs. These are the National Advisory Boards for Impact Investing that were built on the back of the work that the global steering groups of impact investing has been doing globally. Africa has 5 NABs across the region. So there's Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, and Zambia. And so we have some NAB members on the call today. And these have really helped improve and try to shape and influence the space and the environment in which a lot of social investors are going to be playing in. I think data building and knowledge tools are I don't need to say any more about that. I think these are important for us to be building across. And then develop issue-based platforms, cross-cutting themes like gender and other areas of focus like agriculture and food security, health, education, and AVPA will support those platforms over time. If we take the experience in Asia as an example, our sister network in Asia that has built about 5 thematic platforms, these have been hugely successful in driving incremental capital flows into these new spaces by creating spaces within these platforms where advisors and investors in very specific areas can collaborate a lot better under an umbrella of a common issue. So that kind of is some of the stuff that I think would be of significance. And all these recommendations offer some great opportunities of collaboration and programmatic interventions that AVP will be very happy to partner with any people who are listening today that may be interested to see how we can do an ecosystem intervention to support some of this stuff coming to life. And then just lastly, before I open up for questions in terms of future research, the purpose of this landscape study was to create a baseline upon which with ecosystem interventions and programs and additional investments, we can start seeing trends in a positive direction. So the plan is hopefully we can repeat this study every 2 to 3 years and see what kind of progress are we making, where are the gaps and where are the opportunities for additional investments. So some opportunities that have come up include looking at more innovative financing around sectoral performance of social impact bonds. Once again, there's some huge lessons from South Africa, and really grateful for the work that the Bata Institute is doing, and Oni and her team down in Cape Town. They are doing some really leading stuff on not just in South Africa, but on the continent. And we really need to see how we can leverage the fact that we have the only institution with innovative financing capabilities, trading capabilities in this part of the world to enhance the broader ecosystem advancing in innovative financing. So social impact bonds, I know conversations are undergoing with people like the JSC to see how they can support that kind of stuff. So some great opportunities there. I think the role of CSR policy in promoting, giving corporate South Africa is significantly important. And there's a lot that the rest of the continent can learn from South Africa, but also within this same policy, sorry, excuse the noise from my background. I'm having my alarm being fixed at the moment. Consistent with this, the policy also has to adapt and change to fit the modern needs. So for example, as a foundation, if you want to play in an outcome-based instrument, you can only play as an outcome-based payer, not as an investor. And there is quite a bit of money in foundations that could come into outcome-based instruments. And I think we've got to find and see how we can influence policies. And this is some of the things that the NABs can do to try and make this space a lot more conducive to implementation of new ways of investment. Further research on philanthropic giving in the region is important. There's some interesting studies coming out. You probably have seen the one from Bridgespan that talks about some interesting things. So some of the things that Rachel Wangari quoted here about high net worth individuals giving money to governments. I think that study from Bridgespan say that up to 40% of money from high net worth individuals goes to government aligned projects. But there's still need for us to do a lot more in that space. Faith-based giving, I think, is a very interesting space. I think especially in these modern times where we have such high youth unemployment, and yet Africans continue to tithe heavily to their churches. I think there's a space for churches to provide some high risk initial capital to support youth entrepreneurship, to support the growth of accelerators and incubators, and build more investable pipelines from these institutions. Demand side research, I think that's stuff that needs to be ongoing, especially in the context of the COVID impact. More and more needs to be done in that space. Technical assistance models vary, but they have to be suitable to our local players. And then data gathering, as I mentioned before, is significantly important too. So these are some of the emerging opportunities that came out of the study. And it's only the beginning. We hope to use this study as a launch pad to not only open up doors for more research, but also more programmatic intervention. So I'll stop there and just see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Frank. So we've had a couple of questions come through the chat. And for anyone who's watching the chat, we've answered some of them, but just to highlight, we had a question about why DFIs focus so strongly on financial services and fintech. And Karnika has written that's largely because they focus on financial inclusion, that there are really many different innovative solutions and enterprises operating in that space, and it's a highly scalable sector that DFIs are also knowledgeable about because of their investments in that sector across the world. The study did look at social impact bonds. There are a lot of examples of social impact bonds that are included in the study, which someone asked a question, I think, Johnny, about whether or not those were looked at as a sort of source of innovative financing for nonprofits. We had a question about the sustainability aligned fund managers, which is also addressed in the report in terms of what that includes, which is basically impact investing funds, private equity, venture capital, private debt funds, blended finance funds, and any of those funds that are deploying capital into the sustainable development goal aligned sectors is what was included. So we've got a few more questions coming through. Will we be able to view the recording? Frank, are we putting the recording up on our website after this, I assume?
Yes, so you should be able to get the recording. It should be up by Monday latest. So yes, you'll be able to get it, and we'll send you an email once the recording is up.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. And then Rachel Wangari has put the link to the reports in the chat, so you can find that directly on our website, avpa.africa, under the Value Hub. We've got the 3 regional reports are there for Southern Africa, East Africa, and West Africa, and you can sort of dive into different sections and content there. Johnny also says, going back to the point on the role of faith-based organizations investing in high-risk opportunities. Frank, I don't know if you want to talk more about that, because I know that's something that is really important to you and something that AVPA will be continuing to look at going forward.
Yeah, Johnny, I think when you look at faith-based organizations, part of what that opens up is what is unique about Africa, and what are some of the uniquely African sources of capital that you probably wouldn't find in many other places. And as I mentioned, the one thing that Africans give money to is their churches and religious organizations. And I think for those of us who are older than 40, we grew up with a lot of mission hospitals that we visited as for healthcare, and missionary schools and stuff like that. But that's kind of dried up in the last couple of years as the landscape of churches has changed on the continent. So I strongly believe that there is space for us to look at how churches can support young people who make up majority of their flock in any case, to either learn about entrepreneurship or be entrepreneurial and invest in some of these young people in the early stages, where they either need the training or they need the initial seed capital. So that's an area that I think that's almost very uniquely African, but something that I think offers a great opportunities for us to explore and explore that with the religious groups. Rachel, you're muted.
I am muted. All right, so we've got another comment coming through from Margaret. You can also feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question directly. So Margaret says, a key point that catches my eye is the opportunity to advance something of a public good given in the space of both TA and M&E tools together. Rachel Wangari or Karnika, do you want to talk at all about sort of what we've looked at for TA and M&E in the study?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rachel. So I'll touch upon this point, and I guess what we have seen as a part of this study is that there are various TA models being used to support the enterprises, that DFIs invest in or the fund managers invest in. So some of the things that we found gap in, and definitely that should we have identified, should be focused upon, and the ecosystem should come together and it could be used as a programmatic intervention, is identifying the TA models for the NGOs and the not-for-profit, because while as of now there is a lot of capacity building support that exists for the businesses, the impact enterprises, social enterprises, but then there is a limited support, TA support for the NGOs and the non-profits. With the decreasing donor funding across the continent, there is definitely a need for increased efficiency of the NGOs, and therefore the capacity building and technical assistance in identifying more innovative funding models for the NGOs could be helpful. The second thing is also that while there multiple TA models exist, there is also a need to identify which works and which doesn't work, and also the focus of the TA to also increase on later stage businesses. Whereas a lot of TA and enterprise support exists for the early stage businesses, there is limited support that exists at the later stage or the SMEs. Those are some of the things particularly that we identified in regards to the TA, and definitely there is a need for programmatic interventions in that space. And the same goes for the M&E or the impact measurement as well. So it's very, very critical for all the ecosystem players to identify and have common structures, tools to measure the impact, so that the impact can be scaled. I'll stop there. I hope I have answered your question there, Margaret. I guess it was from Margaret.
Yes, yeah, Margaret says thank you. Thank you, Karnika. We also had an interesting comment, excuse me, in the chat from Kingombe, who says that he's advising the African Church Assets Development Fund, which is really interesting, talking about the need for better asset management amongst churches across Africa. And that's something that I think would be really interesting to look at, sort of lessons from the work that you're doing, Kingombe, and how we can apply that in other regions as well, because obviously the capital that's held by churches across the continent is quite significant. And we've seen in every regional study the need for more collaboration between social investors and faith-based organizations. Because you really see what really comes out strongly in terms of the concentration in sectors and geographies by other capital providers, by DFIs, by private equity and venture capital and impact investment funds. Whereas when you look at activity by faith-based organizations, it's really far and wide, and the reach into rural areas and across countries is quite significant. So if you look at, addressing SDG finance and social challenges outside of the major cities and major economies, we really need to be more creative in how we do that. So we'd love to pick up on that as well. Frank, you have a question from Bernard. Do you want to jump in there?
Yes, so I see Bernard's question, who asks, who are the members of AVPA? How is AVPA structured? How will AVPA coordinate different stakeholders to agree and achieve a common goal for venture philanthropy? So Bernard, good question. So first of all, just to be clear to everyone, AVPA is an investor-only network. So we only take in deployers of capital. And the capital we're talking about here is not just financial capital, but also human and intellectual capital. There's a lot of platforms where investors can engage with their investees, so what we do uniquely at AVPA is we create an investor-only platform. And specifically on the financial capital providers, we bring together the investors across the continuum of capital, so providers of grants, debt, and equity. Because as we've spoken about before, if we think about what we need to do at an ecosystem level to increase the flow of capital into African social investments, is to see how we can blend these different types of capital across the continuum for greater efficiency in capital deployment. So how do we enable the blend of grant capital with debt and equity? So a lot more capital can be unlocked in that context. So we from our perspective, anyone who's deploying financial, human, or intellectual capital qualifies to be part of the AVPA network. And AVPA is structured as an investor network. We have offices in Nairobi, our headquarters in Nairobi, and I hope I answered this question correctly, Bernard. So if you don't, please let me know. We have offices in Johannesburg, in Lagos, and our headquarters is in Nairobi. And we'll be looking in the near future to open up in Francophone Africa, North Africa as well. And we're really enablers and facilitators. We're not implementers. So we're very deliberate in making sure that whatever we do is through partnership with our members. We don't do anything to compete with our members. So we'll not find us running a fund because our members can do that much better. But we're about enabling those funds to come alive and to happen by bringing the right people together. And our coordination in terms of how we help stakeholders agree to achieve common goals, not just for venture philanthropy, but for deploying other types of instruments and capital through, let's say, impact investing or other types of things, is through a couple of different things. One, we'll first of all do a lot of capacity building. So the programs I spoke about in terms of investor education is something we'll do. And then there's a lot of bespoke services that we're going to offer. To give you a case in point, on Monday, we had a session with a European company that wants to seed an African primary healthcare fund. But they want to do it in collaboration with other African investors. So they came to us and said, they came to us through our European network. They said, we want to come to Africa. Please help us plug into the African investment space. We pulled together about 50 African investors interested in health, and we had a really good session on how this fund could be made to come alive, how different players could contribute to it. So a lot of what we'll be doing will be designed to meet member needs with the end goal in mind. So we'll have flexibility in the process, but the end goal in mind will be about how can we help you deploy more capital in Africa? How can we connect you with local African investors? And how can we help the broader ecosystem grow better doing this? So Bernard, hopefully I've answered your question. If not, I'll be happy to take it offline.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Frank, and congratulations to Rachel and Frank for great presentations and very informative about what you're doing. As you know, Frank, I know you well. We've been both active in this space for quite a while. I always have the concern that in Africa in particular, and particularly among private foundations or family foundations or high net worth individuals, they have a tendency to want to do their own thing. And I think AVPA can play a significant role in trying to get them to come together, not just to pool their resources, but to tap into third-party resources and get more synergies and get more impact by working together. And I think AVPA has a key role to play in that regard, but it is, as you know, a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely, Bernard. And I think, especially when we talk to investors coming in from the US, they are very used to syndicated arrangements and syndicated deals where they collaborate in co-investing with other people. They see this as a way of also reducing risk, but also learning from others. And that's something, you're totally correct, Bernard. It's something we have to do better, especially on the top end of the giving scale or where high net worth individuals are involved. We'll be able to achieve a lot more together with different types of capital than we can on our own.
Maybe just one final comment from me is from the presentation and the data you provided, I think we should all recognize that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does tend to skew the analysis towards health, they are definitely one of the, or if not the biggest player in terms of a private foundation or a family foundation involved in social impact in Africa, and are also, I hate to say this, particularly if anybody from the foundation is on the line, very difficult to work with, to collaborate with. It's a bit like trying to convince the World Bank to do things differently. So,
I think, Bernard, we had a conversation yesterday with another organization that's looking at healthcare, and healthcare is a tough space for investors to come in. It's not a place that is easy to necessarily to make money. It's also got a lot of emotions that are attached to how the space operates, but also offer some really interesting opportunities. And I think we're seeing some really great technological advances coming through from Africa that could very easily be scaled up, and it offers some really great investment opportunities too. Our job at AVPA will be to bring this to the light and visibility of investors, and create the right deal flow, hopefully, that we can then expose to greater investors from within and outside Africa.
thank you, Frank.
Great, thanks, Frank. We've got 2 more questions that have come through the chat that maybe Rachel or Karnika want to address from Booking. What are some of the major themes that inhibit success in the regions for entrepreneurs that can't attract needed finance?
Yeah, I'll take that, Rachel. So we identified a number of challenges, and this cut across the demand, supply, as well as the ecosystem side, that are really inhibiting the growth of entrepreneurship in South Africa. And on the supply side, just looking at the inadequate supply of finance and lack of customized finance for the specific stage of the businesses. That is one of the major factors. I think the main that was really emphasized by most of the people that we spoke to, that is inhibiting growth. But then there's also the demand side where the enterprise themselves don't have adequate capacity in terms of human resource. So they are not able to hire the right talent to drive growth of the businesses. They also lack understanding of basic financial or sophisticated financial terms. So even when they go to negotiate with investors, they are not able to get the right deal. So that's one of the challenges that is also hindering their growth. On the ecosystem side, policy is one of the major challenges where social enterprises and small businesses are really not recognized in government policies. So we've seen that across most of the countries, there is no social enterprise act, for example, that really categorizes or says what a social enterprise is. So most of this will still be required to pay the normal taxes that that businesses are required to, and that's one of the hindrances of them growing. As I mentioned earlier, 85 to 90% of the businesses in South Africa are recorded to fail in the first 5 years of operation. Again, just the ecosystem support. So most of it, as we've seen, is largely concentrated in the main cities. So businesses that are outside the cities, which are also more, are unable to access the networks, the information, as well as just the capacity building programs that are needed to help them grow and scale up. Again, we also identified that the infrastructure, particularly in South Africa, is very costly. When you look at internet costs, South Africa has one of the highest costs of internet. That would definitely act as a barrier to growth for a business that is tech-based and relies a lot on technology.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. And I'll just quickly add 2 more points there also, that what we identified and even the previous research have shown that many of these businesses, the new businesses that are coming up, they are necessity businesses because there is a lack of jobs in the region, and that's why the youth population is getting into the businesses rather than because of the fact that they have the adequate skills or a good business model to stay. So that's also the reason that because majority of these businesses are the necessity businesses or the subsistence businesses, they may actually not need the capital, the equity capital, or even the debt capital that is being provided by the VCs or the PEs or the DFIs. They require a different type of capital, which is more longer term and more favorable to them because they are not high growth businesses, but just sorry, I think I muted myself. And they need to continue to sustain their businesses. So there is a need for more venture debt in that respect, or maybe more microfinance for these businesses to grow. And secondly, there is the second point that I wanted to add in addition to Rachel's point was the informality in the businesses. Particularly in Southern Africa, outside of South Africa, there is a high percentage of the businesses which are informal in nature. So basically they are not registered and all, and this also create a lot of hindrance for the businesses to attract the much needed finance that they need.
Great, thank you, Karnika and Rachel. We're going to take this one last question from the chat that was about policy barriers to pension funding for social investment, and whether we looked at pension funds in the study, what can be done to unlock pension fund capital from Haggai. Karnika, Rachel, do you want to address that?
Rachel, please, you can go ahead.
Yeah. So we were not, we didn't, because we had a very big scope of capital providers that we were looking at. This wasn't comprehensively covered in the report, and definitely presents a scope for future research going forward.
I would just add to that as well. Thanks, Rachel. That you know, as you can see, AVPA really focuses on promoting collaboration across these many different areas and types of social investors. And we're also quite conscious of not wanting to recreate work that's being done by others. So I think in the private equity space, there's been a lot of work on mobilizing local capital and pension fund capital for private equity funds. And I'm really sort of keen to not recreate that work that's being done by others as well. But AVPA really looks for opportunities to collaborate across these different networks and associations that are doing this different work.
So Rachel, Rachel, and Karnika, thank you, thank you very much. Intellecab, thank you so much for your time and the effort and your contribution to the study. It's been really fascinating working with you. To the people listening in, I'm hoping this is something that will trigger additional thoughts, debate, but more importantly, progress and initiative towards helping us solve some of our problems better, helping us be a lot more collaborative, be a lot more creative, and be smart with the areas that we focus our efforts in. So I look forward to staying in touch with people. Our website is open. Most of you know me. I'm really keen to make sure that we piggyback on this and stretch the opportunities that the study has presented to us to open up as many of the right conversations and initiatives as possible. We promise and commit to you that we'll be as supportive as possible to people who are looking to enhance capital flow into social investments in Africa. That's our mission, and we commit to it. And we're very open to collaboration opportunities. So please, if you have things that you think we can work together on, by all means, please reach out. But others, to everyone, thank you so much for making time. People who had to wake up early in the US to join us, I think thank you very much. For the South Africans who woke up to really sad numbers around the unemployment numbers that came out this morning. This is why we exist. This is why those of us who play in this space do the work that we do. If you want to demonstrate impact globally, there's no better sandbox than Africa. So we're very fortunate to be in a place where we can demonstrate our competence and skills. And let's kind of work together through this. Others, thank you, everyone. And please look out for additional events on AVPA's website, and we'll be rolling out a lot more stuff in the next couple of weeks. This is a deal share platform that we have we are piloting as well. Those of you who want to collaborate with others on a deal share platform, please check our events page. There's weekly demonstrations happening. Just sign up. It's every Wednesday for the next 3 weeks. And also our agenda platform is up and running. If you want to sign up to join that, please join us. Others, once again, to everyone, thank you so much for making time, and have a nice